Hey intergalactic police officers, the Comics Kid 2099 here to discuss an episode of Superman the Animated Series. It's titled In Brightest Day. If you haven't seen it, I hope you do before I start spoiling things right now. Abin Sur, the Green Lantern of Sector 2814, comes to Earth and with his dying breath sends his Green Lantern ring to find a worthy person to wield it. Sinestro, the man who killed Sur, comes to Earth and fights Superman and Kyle Rayner, an artist at the Daily Planet who now holds the ring, and Superman and Kyle have to team up to defeat Sinestro. Then Kyle is chosen by the bosses of the Green Lantern Corps, the Guardians of the Universe, to wear the ring permanently. Cue credits. So this episode is pretty good for the first episode of a Green Lantern series. Unfortunately, this is a Superman series, and Superman is barely even a cameo in this episode. We get several team-up episodes in this series, one with Flash, a few with Batman, a later one with Aquaman, but this is the first and only one that chooses to do an origin story for the guest character, which takes up a huge chunk of screen time that could have gone to Superman. In the other team-up adventures, we get to see how Superman interacts with the guest star, usually with some fair amount of headbutting going on. But because we have to do a more or less faithful adaptation of Green Lantern's origin, which does not involve Superman most of the time, we have to basically shove Superman out of the story. And sometimes I would be okay with that. If you want to do a story focusing on Lois trying to be less cynical, or Perry struggling with how journalism is changing in the dawn of the 21st century, or how Jimmy needs to think like a reporter if he wants Perry to take him seriously, that would be fine. But Green Lantern isn't part of this series, and we will never see him again in this series. Heck, we'll only ever see this Green Lantern again once in the Justice League Unlimited series and on the other side of the universe. So doing an entire episode of Superman's series on Green Lantern's origin only for us to never see this character again kinda grinds my gears. But like I said, it's a pretty good Green Lantern story. Hardcore Green Lantern fans might not like that they put Hal Jordan's origin story on Kyle Rayner, but I imagine that was done as a way to provide a little bit of synergy with the comics. At the time, Kyle was the only Green Lantern, and while they might not have been mandated to use Kyle, it probably made sense for them to do so. But they couldn't fit the slaughter of the entire Green Lantern Corps and one of its best members going insane and the rise of a new Green Lantern all in 22 minutes, so they just went with Hal's origin story. Works for me. They did the same thing with Tim Drake and Jason Todd in the new Batman Adventures. And I have spoken to my fellow geeky gentleman Sid Part 2, an avid Green Lantern fan, about the DCAU, and he is not a fan of how Sinestro is used in the DCAU. His complaint is that Sinestro in the comics is an extreme fascist who doesn't see himself as a bad guy. He hunts down villains with extreme prejudice and doesn't think that the Green Lantern Corps goes far enough. So when Sinestro later joins teams with villains led by Luthor and Grodd, it doesn't fit with his characterization in the comics because he would be killing these villains instead of shaking hands with them. And this is a valid complaint, but I don't have much of a problem with it. Sinestro, as we know him now, didn't really come into shape until the mid-2000s when Hal Jordan being a genocidal psychopath was retconned into not being his fault. Sinestro was made into more of a three-dimensional character with more depth and not just a mustache-twirling villain who has a name that is a skip and a hop away from being sinister. Before Green Lantern Rebirth, Sinestro wasn't very well developed. His backstory of being a Green Lantern who fell from grace and took over his homeworld is all there, but he's just a generic bad guy. At the time of this episode coming out, he was probably Green Lantern's biggest foe, but that wasn't saying very much. And if I'm being honest, that still isn't saying very much. Heyo! So I don't have a problem with the idea of the DC Animated Universe reinventing Sinestro, but the direction they chose to go with him is just kinda, He wants to kill all the Green Lanterns so that he can become more powerful. That almost feels like they deliberately tried to come up with a generic villain motivation. Sure, maybe I have rose-tinted glasses. Now that Sinestro is an interesting character 20 years after this episode aired, it's easy for me to say that this doesn't measure up. But even if we hadn't gotten the last 20 years of character development for him, I still think this would be weak motivation, and I don't know what they could have done differently. If this was a two-parter, I would have suggested Sinestro's fall from grace happened simultaneously with Kyle's rise to heroism. Maybe Sinestro and Abin Sur were fighting a monster or some space pirates or something, and they killed Abin, and Sinestro thinks that he stands a better chance of taking the fight back to them if he takes the ring, but it goes to Kyle instead. I don't know, that doesn't sound great, but it's better than what we got, I think. My only other issue with this episode is that it spends so much time on the setup for the ring coming to Kyle, and then the fight with Sinestro, that there's very little room for Kyle to have a character arc. We already know that he's a hero even before he gets the ring, when he fights the burglar, but then at the end, he's not sure if he deserves the ring, and everyone says, nope, you do, and that's the end of that. Not really sure if I would have wanted this episode to be a two-parter, but I do feel like that we needed a little bit more than what we got in the final moments of this episode. Overall, I do like the Green Lantern stuff here more or less, but I don't think that it has any place in a Superman series. But what did you guys think of my review and of the episode? If you like this video, be sure to check me out every weekend as I'll be talking about other episodes of this series, and check me out during the week as I do other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.